So hi everyone, we are delighted to welcome you at the HEC UK House and also to welcome the full sustainability and organization team here in London for this joint event on climate change and migration, and also to brainstorm and discuss all together of what impact can business have on these very important matters. So tonight we will be joined first, just to give you an overview of the evening. We'll have first the academic part with François Gemenne and Marieke Huystentruyt. I'm sorry if I... Huystentruyt. So you're going to have the academic perspective and then also the practitioner perspective. And so a big thank you to Raphaëlle from Adecco and Jessie from Ben&Jerry, who will be sharing their journey as a company of what they can do in terms of social impact. And this event will be moderated by Behishta, who is an Imagine Fellow student from HEC and who is a student on sustainability topic and is also writing her thesis on this topic. So we're very thankful for our panel speakers for being here tonight and also the full S&O team. But maybe quick introduction by Bénédicte, who is the Executive Director of the S&O Institute.
Thank you so much, Laura, for welcoming us and co-organizing this event with us tonight. So a few words on S&O. So we recently changed the name. It was Society and Organizations. Today it's Sustainability and Organization. So it's an institute. And we are very ambitious. We want to reinvent business. Wow. We want more concretely to contribute to the sustainability transition because we do believe it's getting urgent. So the climate and environmental transition and also the social transition, the just transition. And we have 3 centers. One center is on climate and the environment. One center is on inclusive economy, so it's on the social dimension of sustainability. And one center is on purposeful leadership. It's more maybe on the governance issue, looking at the purpose of the company, and also trying to embark our students on the questioning about their own purpose. And why this topic? Why did we choose this climate and refugees topic for tonight? Is because it's at the heart of at the intersection of the 3 centers as well, and at the heart of what we want to do. Contribute to this just transition. And we do believe that refugees is a hot topic. We are just at the start of. Huge flows of your refugees related to climate, but not only climate, obviously geopolitical tensions as well. And we do believe that companies have a role to play in that. That is part of their responsibility. There may be also opportunities. So that's what we want to explore. Building bridges, as we like to do at S&O, building bridges between academics and practitioners. And I really thank our 2 researchers and our 2 practitioners, Jessie and Raphaëlle, for joining us tonight. And it will be also a discussion with you. So we expect you to ask questions, maybe sometimes share experiences if you have. It should be as interactive as possible. So thank you very much. And I leave the floor to François Gemenne, who joined HEC recently, and maybe you, François, you can introduce yourself. Everybody knows you.
No, that's absolutely not true. Well, thank you very much, Bénédicte. Good evening to all of you. Thanks a lot for joining this event. And first of all, thank you to the HEC Alumni UK Association, and congratulations for the purchase of this house in a street I did not even know existed in London, and yet I used to be at the LSE, so I feel a bit ashamed that I never noticed that this street actually existed around Holborn. This being said, yes, I'm the academic director of the Master in Sustainability and Social Innovation, aka SASI, at HEC. I'm also a researcher on the nexus between climate change and migration, which is a topic I became interested in about 20 years ago when I was a young intern at the United Nations, and one day I got stuck in a lift with the ambassador of Tuvalu to the UN. And I must confess that at that time, first of all, I did not know about Tuvalu, and I wasn't sure exactly where it was located on a map of the world. I just knew Tuvalu from some stamps that I used to collect as a teenager. And two, at that time, that was 2001 in New York, climate change still appeared very much as a very abstract issue, as a risk for the future, but not really as a present reality. And therefore, there wasn't much focus on the human impacts of climate change. And I became really interested in the story that was told to me by the ambassador about the fact that maybe in a few decades, his country would be underwater and that the whole population of Tuvalu, that's about 11,000 people, would have to be displaced. And as a matter of fact, as you might have seen in the news, Tuvalu recently concluded an agreement with Australia, which is about providing the very first climate refugee status or so in the world. So that's really an interesting development. When I look back at the situation some 23 years ago now in that lift at the UN. What I would like to do by way of introduction to this evening is perhaps to dispel three current myths that we continue to have about the nexus between climate change and refugees, and three myths which I think continue to shape the public debate in a direction that is likely to misguide us when it comes to what we can do to integrate these refugees, to manage these refugee flows, and to make sure that all of this happen in a fashion as orderly as possible. Myth number one, that we're dealing with a future risk. And very often, when we speak of the nexus between climate change and refugee, we speak in the future tense, as if it were a risk that we could still avoid by drastically reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. I think it is really important to comprehend the fact that as of now, there are already millions of people being displaced as a result of climate impacts. If I only take the figure for 2022, and alas, the figure of 2023 will only be available in May of this year, but the figure of 2022, for example, indicate that 32 million people were displaced as a result of extreme events related to climate change, what we call climate disaster. And by that we mean floods, cyclones, droughts, landslides, and these kind of brutal events that force people out of their home. There were 32 million in the year 2022, and that year was no exception. Every year, on average, for the past 10 years, there are roughly about 25 million people being displaced on a yearly basis as a result of climate disaster. Every year, this number is higher than the number of people displaced by war, conflicts, and violence. In 2022, and alas, there were lots of conflicts and violence in that year as well, there were 19 million displaced as a result of war and violence. So we're not dealing with a future risk, we're dealing with a current, present reality that demand present policy responses. And I think that if we treat it only as a future risk, well, the risk is that we could be blind to what is happening on the ground already and to the policy responses and programs that need to be deployed, and some of them are already being deployed, and I think it's important to stress that. One of those policies and programs, perhaps the most significant, is the one deployed by the Platform on Disaster Displacement, which is an international organization which only very few people know about, but yet this organization was created in the year 2016 as a way to address these displacements and to foster the protection of the rights of those displaced. So this is myth number one that needs to be dispelled. We're talking about a present reality. Second myth to dispel is the idea that we would be dealing with a discrete and new category of migration. And very often we have a tendency to consider that migration flows are distributed into two streams. On the one hand, the political refugees, that is, people being persecuted in their home country and to whom we would have an obligation to protect, even though that obligation is understood in a very diverse fashion depending on the country where you're located, and any allusion to the current deal with Rwanda would be a mere coincidence here. The second stream being the people we call economic migrants, that is, people who we think are migrating voluntarily because they are seeking a better salary, a better income, a better job, better opportunities. Yet what research has shown is that on the ground, these flows of people were usually mixed, and that most migration was actually multi-causal. If one looks at the mixed migration flows that are coming to Europe these days, on the same boat, you will find people from very different countries migrating for very different reasons with very different aspirations. And very clearly, when we look at the interplay between migration drivers, we realize that those categories of migration that we're using in public debates and in policy debates actually are much more helpful to justify the policies that we've implemented in industrialized countries rather than describe an empirical reality. What is especially worse is that since the so-called refugee crisis in Syria from 2014 till 2016, we've usually applied some kind of normative judgment to these categories, as if we had, on the one hand, the good political refugees whom we ought to protect, and on the other hand, the bad economic migrants who we should send back to the country they're from. And of course, this raises a lot of moral and ethical issues, but also a lot of research issues, given that we know that these categories are not as discrete and separate as they appear to be in public debates. And therefore, we had a tendency, and I would say perhaps a temptation, to think of the so-called climate refugees as a new, third, additional category that would be brought upon by climate change. And for many, highlighting the dangers of climate change, it was important, of course, to pinpoint those people as a third additional category. Yet, empirical studies show that very often when we look at migration journeys, actually, the migration drivers are intertwined with each other and are also influencing each other. Not only do the impacts of climate change force people to flee directly, but they also influence, of course, the economic, political, demographic, or cultural drivers of migration. Just one example to make my point. In sub-Saharan Africa, we reckon that about half of the households depend on subsistence agriculture for their primary livelihood. Subsistence agriculture is a kind of agriculture that is extremely vulnerable to any change in the rainfall or in the temperature, which means that for about half of the population in sub-Saharan Africa, any change in the climate means a change in the livelihood, means a loss of income. And therefore, for those families facing that situation, usually there are two options available: either to seek other land for themselves, and that can induce conflicts and tensions, especially in the region of the Sahel. The other strategy being to send one or several of their sons to the city in the hope that they will find another work and be able to send a supplementary income to the family. And therefore, given that migration journeys usually span across space and across time, sometimes for several years, we have a combination of environmental, economic, and political factors driving people sometimes to cross the Mediterranean and to arrive on the shores of Europe. The problem is, when they arrive on the European shore, we only look at the country they're from, and depending on whether this country is at war or not, we decide that they're political refugees or economic migrants. Yet, if we were to pay a bit more attention to the drivers of their journey, including their internal migration, we would find that there is a mix of economic, environmental, and political factors, and that these factors all influence each other, and that people, do not usually distinguish between these factors. I mean, the salary I get from HEC is exactly the same in winter and in summer. And I'm willing to bet that for most, if not all of you, the amount of money you have on your bank account does not really depend on season, perhaps a bit less at Christmas. But apart from that, your salary does not depend on environmental conditions. We've completely forgotten that for a significant share of the world population, their economic resources were highly dependent upon environmental conditions. Third and final myth that I wanted to dispel before leaving the floor to Marieke is the fact that we are often using the prospect of mass migration to Europe as a way to convince governments and public opinions to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And very often, this argument has been used by a lot of those advocating for a massive cut in greenhouse gas emissions as a way to say, you'd better reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, because if you don't do so, then you'll be flooded with millions of people from Africa and the Middle East knocking on your door seeking asylum, and that's going to be a problem for you. And I think we need to be extremely careful with that rhetoric, because very clearly that rhetoric presents migration as a threat for societies and presents the migrants themselves as a potential danger for social cohesion. And this narrative, which is often voiced with the best intentions of the world, that narrative actually supports a very xenophobic agenda that would present migration as a lethal threat for societies. And I think we need to be extremely careful with that agenda, with that rhetoric, and with that, I would say, with the images and political consequences that it carries with it. And actually presenting climate change as a potential future threat in terms of mass migration is likely to be extremely detrimental to the rights of those who migrate right now in our societies. And I think that we need to be extremely careful with that rhetoric, which, as I said, is often voiced with the best intentions in the world, but we all know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'll leave it there and I'll leave the floor with Marieke, and Marieke will explain what companies can do really to address this challenge and what is the responsibility of companies with that stake that is clearly one of the key stakes of the 21st century.
Thank you, François. Oh, sorry. Okay, so against the backdrop of François, I would like to share with you some ideas around what businesses can do, and try to convince you that there's a lot more that we could do than maybe you had thought of before coming here. So I guess where we start typically is to think about own workforce. Okay, so we have multinationals who have sites across the globe, and so who may ask themselves, okay, can we integrate migrants / refugees into our workplace? And this is clearly an opportunity, especially as we see massive labor shortages. In fact, when you look at the graphs below, you can see that in this figure, you see that actually the percentage share of companies that are reporting talent shortages across the globe in OECD countries has been growing massively, especially after the pandemic. Okay, and this is costing governments a lot of money. A lot of money. But what you should know is that this is not just affecting. These are not just shortages for people with higher educational degrees. In fact, we know, if you take, for instance, in Germany, we know that there are labor shortages. 20% are jobs for people with higher education, 60% are jobs for people with vocational skills training, and 20% are jobs for people who have not finished high school. Okay, so there's a real opportunity, you might say, and we know from many studies have proven that and have shown empirically that labor mobility is actually a good thing for society. It's good for the people who are involved, and it contributes to the benefit of society at large. This has been shown with lots of data, and this is another recent summary of studies that show this. Okay, so that's, having said that, and this goes back to what François said, in fact, at the same time, we face stark political opposition against migration. We see that this is actually one of the biggest fears that when people are surveyed in polls is immigrants. So why is that? Because they are afraid that immigrants will take away jobs. There may be a short-term hit, short-term disruption, but studies have proven that actually, in the long term, this is good for society. So why am I showing you this? Because I think when we think about what businesses can do, we will have to work around this as well. It's not just about placing people into jobs, because if the jobs are not about inclusion, if it's just about diversity, we're never, this will not make the difference that it should. So what I wanted to sort of convince you of is a couple of things where we need to sort of perhaps change a little bit our mindset. So first of all, and I think this came out clearly with François, when we think about refugees, this is very heterogeneous. I mean, you talked about the different motivations of why people are seeking refuge, but the community is extremely heterogeneous. And we should think about the talents that they bring is also extremely heterogeneous. The fact that they have, the journeys that they have made across continents, maybe across the sea, shows that they're incredibly resilient. So let's talk about talent, please. Let's not stop talking about, just a job to fill. And so this perspective, what we need to better understand is what the perspectives are of refugees vis-a-vis the labor market system. How do they see their opportunities? What are the opportunities that they're looking for? And then connect this to the perspectives that the welcoming employees will have to also take stock of. I mean, how welcoming are they? How do we think about working together in a team when some people are actually may not speak exactly the same language as you do, may not have the same background that you do, may have some post-traumatic stress to deal with, and so thinking about how teams, such diverse teams, function is a huge challenge. So let's think about connecting these two perspectives, okay? And so what I'm trying to say here with this slide is that when businesses want to step up, they will probably need to think beyond just opening jobs. There's more work to be done. Again, what I just mentioned again, so placement of refugees, we shouldn't stop there. Unfortunately, when you look at the statistics, often that's what we look at. Are they still holding the job 2 years after they entered the job? Which is actually not enough. We should be thinking about their journeys. What is the trajectory of a refugee in the job? You talked about the trajectory coming here or coming to France, or anywhere. But what's the aspiration? Okay, and so once we start thinking about that, we necessarily need to take a long-term interest, right? So we need to move away from a sort of short-term focus to a long-term focus, and really understand that the benefits that refugees can bring are there for the long run. And if companies are smart, they will be able to actually exploit those in the long term. Okay. All right. Okay. So of course, companies, their main focus is to create jobs, perhaps but that may be too narrow. Okay. So as we know, there's other needs that companies may have to consider, such as childcare. Many of us may have the luck that there's a mother living nearby to take care of our kids, but that's not typically, that may not be true for refugees. So what's the solution? What are we proposing to our new employees? What about access to healthcare? Okay, so we know that the needs may be more profound for some of the people arriving in a new country. What about housing? I mean, this is a huge challenge. I mean, this must be true in London, but in Paris, we have a huge problem that people who want to recruit low-skilled labor, for instance, not just that, but it's where will they be living? Because the cost of living is too expensive, close nearby the factory or nearby the business. Mentoring, etc. So we need to, again, I would like to propose that we probably need to extend the scope, not just focusing narrowly on placing people in jobs, but actually thinking about the bigger picture and thinking more systemically. And of course, that means that businesses will need to find partners to fill in some of those needs. Okay, and then I just want to mention that, on the one hand, we have multinational companies. We have Adecco, who is a multinational, who's working in the space, who has this, huge, centralized, has huge opportunities to scale, their expertise across the globe, but at the same time, they are also really taking stock of what the local ecosystem looks like, right? So who are and I was very struck by some of the meetings I've had with Adecco around this. So it's top down, but it's definitely bottom up as well. Okay, so just to sort of, sorry, I'm going to like overwhelm you a little bit with facts and figures and ideas, and then we can, this will be food for thought as we take a drink later. But I just wanted to remind us that actually 1 million refugees are actually in one refugee camp. Okay, the Rohingya refugees have been there since 2017. Those of you who've been there, I worked together with a student who does his research on this in the Rohingya camp, and basically these people it's like a prison, right? So they're not allowed to leave. It's very difficult to hold a job, but there's lots of talent here. Okay, so these people are not they're not integrated in Bangladesh. Bangladesh at the moment is not ready to integrate all these people into the labor force. But some of them, guess what? Some of them are actually doing work at a distance. They are like the global domestics. They're actually working for some of your companies, perhaps, but at a distance. Isn't that amazing? So another thing I just wanted to kind of, and this relates back to what François also said, remember there's a lot of internally displaced people. We talk about the people who get here, but there's so many more who are actually in Africa. Okay, so their internal displacement is enormous. So what's the solution? What are we going to do about this? Are we going to, because guess what, refugee camps, this is not temporary. If you thought refugee camps is a temporary phenomenon, most refugees are there for many years. So what are we doing about this? Okay, and then I know, I don't know if somebody from Impact Hub was here. Is she here? She signed up. I'm not sure she came, but I just wanted to pay tribute to a report that they published with UNHCR about refugee entrepreneurship. Okay, so this is again, we're talking about people who may hold a job as an employee, but there's a lot more that we can do to support refugees. Okay, now let me kind of enlarge the circle a little bit. Let's think about community. Okay, what's the force of community to address refugee crisis? Let me use the time to talk about a recent piece of research that I've written with Leandro Nardi, who's also at HEC, where we asked a simple question. So what happens to a business when the crisis hits home? When there's a tragic incident, meaning a migrant, asylum seeker, refugee, who either passes away, who deceases, or who disappears. When that happens close to the headquarters of an office, of a company, does that change anything? Does the company respond? Okay, so we use historic data because, again, the refugee crisis is not new. We have been facing a refugee crisis for a very long time in Europe. Okay, so sometimes we have peaks, but it's an ongoing crisis. So we use this. Actually, what we do in this paper is that we actually we use this open source platform, which is called Migrants File. I'm not sure it's journalists who actually note when there's a tragic incident concerning refugees, involving refugees. So we took all these GIS localized points and we connect them with all the headquarters of major companies in Europe. And so the question then becomes, what happens when the distance between a tragic incident and one of those black spots, when that is small, when it happens close by? And so our theoretical thinking was that, okay, when that happens close by, maybe the community around, the people who live around the company start putting some pressure on the company to do something. All right, so the good news is that we see something happens. Okay, so here you see, here's the incidents. And so, sorry, I'm showing you here a change. So how do companies on average respond to a shock? And what I show you here is that actually we see a change in the CSR. So I'm looking at social policies, CSR, the portfolio of a company, the CSR portfolio. And what we see is that actually they're actually increasing their social policies that are financially immaterial. So by that I mean that they actually don't contribute to higher profits for the company. They're not financially of interest. And they shift away from financially immaterial social policies. So why is that interesting? Well, it can be explained by a signaling story. Companies want to show that they really care, and if they're going to invest in policies that allow them to make money, that doesn't really do the job. So they are actually shifting away from policies that are actually generating revenues for the company to policies that are actually in the short run less profitable. Okay, and so to make this a little bit more concrete, what you can imagine is, and we show this in the data, it's basically there's a bump where these companies are investing more in kind of pro bono work, letting the employees help refugees that arrive in the community close by, and then they're also changing their labor policies. Okay. Now, okay, that was good news. There's something happens, but actually it doesn't happen everywhere. That's the bad news. It only happens, so all the effect that we find using historical data is actually coming off companies that were already high social performers before the crisis hits. So it's not every company that moves, but it's the companies that were already socially engaged that actually react. So that's an important piece of insight. Okay, I'm just going to now abuse my time to talk about studies I really love. Can I? Yeah. All right. So this is a really interesting recent piece of research conducted by people at NYU who looked at data in Germany. Okay, so there's this, and they asked the question, okay, what happens to all these Syrian refugees who arrived in Germany? Are they really socially integrated? So I justify this. Why do I want to talk to you about this? Because I think social integration is clearly complementary to labor market integration. We cannot just separate these things. And so I think it's legitimate to think about this. And so what they show, they're using Facebook data, okay, de-identified Facebook data, and they come up with measures of social integration using basically the Facebook data. So how many Facebook friendships are there between a Syrian and a German person? Do they share public content that is in German? So they use these kind of measures to proxy for social integration. All right, so bad news is that actually Syrians in Germany generally have low levels of social integration. Okay, so when we look at, for instance, on average, a Syrian, how many friends does this person have on Facebook? It's on average 5. In fact, the majority only has 1 or less than 1 German friend, whereas Germans have 20, no, it's 100 on average. So we see this huge difference. What's interesting is that it's geographically, there's heterogeneity geographically. So this is the map of Germany, and we see the blue areas are actually the areas where the social integration is higher, and it corresponds to rural areas. Okay, should have asked you, but I spilled it. Spoiled it. And where the social integration is the worst is in regional cities. Okay, so and then we have cities like Berlin, Munich, Köln are somewhere in between. Okay, so there's variation. So then they ask, what is it about? How do we understand this variation? Is it that the people there are more welcoming, or what's driving this variation? It turns out it has nothing to do with the people themselves. It's not like the Syrians who go there in the rural areas are more motivated to make friendships. That's not explaining the difference. What is actually explaining quite a lot of the difference is the local is actually a local environment, and specifically whether the refugees have had courses around integration, meaning where did they complete a training on learning the language and the culture. That makes a huge difference in terms of the number of ties we see between Syrians and Germans. So integration courses matter, and the initial, so this is the most beautiful part, I think. So the initial contact, so they show that high school students who were in class with a refugee, okay, subsequently, they're much more likely to have contacts, ties with refugees. So it reconfirms a kind of famous contact theory in psychology, which says that, okay, once we have a first contact, our attitudes really change. So it's kind of the only optimistic part of the study. Or maybe this one too, because actually integration courses, if that is really making a difference, that is something that we could actually implement at a large scale. Okay, another beautiful study that was conducted in schools at the border between Turkey and Syria. This was recently published in top journal. So both of these are like top journal, QJE, JPE, top journals, Journal of Political Economy. So this study shows that basically they worked with schools, 80 schools, where there was about 6,500 students enrolled in these schools, and about 16% of those were refugees, Syrian refugees. And the intervention was that, we kind of take 2 groups, control group, treatment group, and in the treatment group, the teachers in those schools were trained to actually provide a perspective-taking class to their children. So basically, it's the teachers who implement an intervention around perspective-taking, okay? And it's kind of so strong. The results they find is too strong to be true, but actually they do really find that the students, and they have many measures that they use, they see that the students are much more pro-social, those that were in the treated school than in the control group school. No, you might be thinking, oh, we're talking business. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because those kids may be the kids of the employees, and those kids may be your future employees. So these programs are powerful. I mean, HEC, we better start thinking about this. It's not just for primary school students. We could think about this at HEC as well, and you can think about this as trainings that you offer to your employees at work. Really powerful stuff. Okay, all right, now I'm gonna conclude. So we've talked about employees, we've talked about the community, and clearly the value chain goes beyond. So we know, and many of you may be aware of new directives coming from Europe, which are putting more pressure on the value chain upstream, supply chain workers, and what role do companies play vis-a-vis their supply chain workers upstream, downstream, and then of course refugees are also consumers, they're end users, right? They need all kinds of services, and I just pay tribute here to the program that Bénédicte actually launched at HEC 15 years ago, the Inclusive and Social Business Certificate, which actually trains our students to think about these questions. How can businesses actually develop products, not the low quality products, but the high quality products that you and I consume? How do we make that accessible to low income people, like refugees? Not all refugees, but some refugees who are like low income. So I just want to say that the specter is big. I hope it excites you to think about this and to bring, and I'll be curious to see. And just last slide. This one I wanted to show, just to show that you will realize this is not a coincidence that we are organizing this topic. It's like a topic that not just François and I are passionate about, and Behishta is passionate about, and Bénédicte is passionate, but many of us are passionate about this at HEC. I hope that, I think we have a lot of programs going on on this topic. I hope that we can actually make this a flagship topic, a topic where we finally start sort of changing things together with partners like Adecco and Ben&Jerry's. Just wanted to leave you with that thought. And I would like to now pass it over to Behishta to introduce first Q&A, pardon. Questions, sorry. Questions first. Do we have time?
We have time for 2 questions.
Okay.
We felt your passion. So if you can leave it to 2 questions, and then we have the networking cocktail to ask more questions.
Perfect. Please, are there any questions to François and I? Please.
I have a question about the study that you showed using Facebook data.
Yes.
Do you think it's slightly flawed and limited in the sense that a lot of refugees coming in from countries won't have access to the internet, right? So you're not getting a clear indicator of how they've integrated beyond the social media platform? I think that's true. Yeah, absolutely. I think so we have these large digital traces like telephone data, internet use, this kind of. I think they are not perfect ways of understanding social integration, but they provide us with so much data that they start showing patterns. But I think if you wanted to really understand, I think clearly there's multiple channels through which Syrians would create links with Germans, and it would not be only through Facebook. I think you're absolutely right. But know that there's a lot of researchers who are actually tapping into large digital databases like telephone exchanges to make some progress on what patterns we see. Please.
Second question. Please. With many refugees, they do not have the right to work nor recognise citizenship in countries, so it's very difficult for businesses to come up with incentives and policies to integrate them. So are you saying large businesses who have influence should be lobbying governments to have more softer policies to give refugees the right to work? For example, in Bangladesh, the Rohingya they're not recognised, the current government doesn't plan on recognising them, nor is that government likely going to change either for a long time.
I think that's it's almost, I would say it's almost if we think about Martha Nussbaum's basic capabilities approach, I mean, not having the right to sort of express yourself, I think there's a true breach of freedoms and a breach of capabilities, which I would say is a call, is a loud call for organizations to step in. And there's, by the way, many, many, many organizations. I mean, Schneider Electric, who's our partner, is also active in these. It's not like nothing is going on, but it's so sensitive. You can't imagine, like, I've been breaking my head with my students, like, what are we going to do? We're not going to propose an entrepreneurship project where we know they're going to be stuck in, like, you know, what? And so basically at the moment, our thoughts around just, can we do something that builds a little bit of self-esteem, self-identity, self-worth? Can we work on some soft skills that maybe be useful in daily life? But it's such a extreme context. I agree with you. And I think it does, yeah, I would say, I would agree with you. I think there's need for, but it's easier for us to say this, right? Because we're not in Bangladesh. We don't have you know, there's also resource constraints in Bangladesh that may make it more difficult.
Maybe if I
Please,
may
yeah.
add on to this, I think the French example is quite telling in this, in matters of hypocrisy. And I think it should be a kind of political priority to allow refugees and asylum seekers to work. As some of you probably know, one of the governments in France that had the toughest policy with regard to migration and asylum was the government of Michel Rocard. And one of the directives implemented under Michel Rocard government was to deny asylum seekers the right to work. So basically, while asylum seekers were basically waiting on a decision to be made on their asylum claim, they were forbidden to work. And in exchange, they were receiving, of course, a kind of allocation from the state because we couldn't let these people basically starve to death. What was the reason for this directive? The rationale was that given that the delay in order to treat a claim for asylum could last up to 3 to 4 years at that time, the government was afraid that if asylum seekers were allowed to work, they would actually integrate into the French society. And if they were to integrate into the French society, and if their claim was eventually denied, then it was much more difficult to expel them because they would have friends, colleagues, you know, a decent work, they would have integrated into the French society. So that is the reason why they were forbidden to work. And that directive was only recently abrogated. But it tells you a lot about really the hypocrisy we have when it comes to refugees and labor.
Thanks for adding that, yeah. All right, Behishta, your time.
Thank you, Marieke. Thank you, everyone. Good evening, and I'm honored to be here and to speak about the topic, which I feel is quite important, but we usually don't talk about it. I'm Behishta. I'm currently studying Master in Sustainability and Social Innovation at HEC, and I'm an Imagine Fellow. So Imagine Fellowship is a program that is welcoming students from war-torn countries to study at HEC, and now I would say we have around 10 fellows on campus from Syria, Ukraine, and young ladies from Afghanistan. Before welcoming my guest speakers, I would love to take a moment and to shed light on a couple of experiences or examples that I left throughout my journey being a refugee. So I left in Afghanistan, I did my undergrad there, and I worked there in private sector, and I was mainly working in impact investing back in 2019. And after the collapse in 2021, I and my family, we had to flee. We had not any other option. I stayed in a refugee camp for more than 7 months in Abu Dhabi, where I also applied for Imagine Fellowship, and thanks to the program, it's amazing I'm here today. After that, I became a refugee in Germany, and after spending like a couple of months in Germany, I came to France to start my studies here. So after a year, I went back. I was very happy to celebrate my longest holiday with my family back in Germany. Not all my family, but at least those who are close to me in terms of living in the same continent. But I could not extend my residential status or refugee status in Germany. So basically now I'm someone without nationality. And I lost it because I didn't know that when I came to France for more than 6 months, I will not be a refugee anymore in Germany. And one of the first experiences or lessons that I get, okay, there is this, like alongside the very long and time-consuming bureaucratical process for obtaining a refugee status or for obtaining a work permit, the other problem is also lack of understanding of the process and also information on the process, your rights, liabilities, and your legal rights on how you can live and integrate in the society in a new continent and build your life from scratch. One other thing I would like to share is confusion when you arrive. When I arrived in Germany, I didn't know what to do. Well, I arrived and 2 days later, I received the admission and a scholarship at HEC. I was quite excited, but I couldn't reply for 2 days because I didn't know what to do. Shall I go? Shall I stay? Because I wanted to build my life from scratch, and I didn't know about my refugee status and so on. But usually the only typical advice that you receive being a refugee because you're labeled is go and try to find a black job, why you're not looking for a job in a pizzeria shop, or why you're not doing a delivery work or whatever. So there are 2 things. One, there is the stereotypes around being or becoming a refugee. Your capabilities, talents, knowledge, experiences are being overlooked. And usually they see you all from a single view or perspective. They associate you with labor market only as a blue labor or blue collar labor. And they see you as someone who has a poor label and are not capable of doing anything. And you're not, how to say, I would say you're not an intellectual property. You can do some physical work, deliver pizza, whatever. And the other thing is here, I also feel that there is lack of mentorship or programs or support or guidance, or I would say role models who would be able to inspire you to start your life, your new life in a new location, and to build everything from scratch and to kind of navigate your path and journey to thrive and to flourish. I think that is it from my side. I don't have that much experience because I'm still not looking for a job. I'm not starting my business yet, but I would love to introduce you to my guest from, okay, I need to check my notes. Okay, Jessie Macneil-Brown from Ben&Jerry's, and also Raphaëlle Thirion from Adecco Group. You're welcome, and we would love to hear more from you. What are your insights? So the first question would be, what is the drive for Adecco Group and Ben&Jerry's, or what is the motivation that you want to work for social integration or refugees or for social innovation?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us, and what a really insightful, amazing conversation. So hopefully you all know about Ben&Jerry's. We're an activism company that makes ice cream, and that's what the company was founded on in 1978. So I'm head of social mission for Europe, and so that's where we use the impact and influence of our business to create progressive change. And our focus since 2017 in Europe has been on refugee justice. Why did we pick that subject? Why do we continue to work on that subject? It's because it's a key critical issue that we feel is impacting Europe, and that not enough is being done on, but more importantly, that we can have impact on. So we have activism managers in 6 countries, the UK, Spain, the Netherlands, France, Sweden and Germany, where we actively work with the refugee movement to call out the government and the EU on their inhumane policies at the moment. You can't question that at the moment. But we also use the impact of our business. So we have a refugee entrepreneurship program, which we've been running since 2017. And we're also looking at all the other ways we can use our business to drive impact, raise awareness, advocate for other businesses to do something similar. So this 2023, we launched our first ice cream that we co-created with refugee entrepreneurs. So that's just, some of the things that we do as a business. We're looking at the supply chain. Ben&Jerry's is part of Unilever, so we're working with Unilever to look at how we can bring more refugee-led businesses into our supply chain. And obviously employment in the business and other opportunities. So if we're looking for, say, creatives to work with, or any opportunity where we go out through procurement, we always try to do a shout out within our refugee networks to offer that work as well. So that's just a little bit of what we do and why we do it. If anyone here is from the business and wants to learn more, it's a very lonely space. We would like more of you with us because I think to the points that we've heard earlier, there is a huge responsibility for business. And yeah, so we would welcome anyone joining us on that. We don't want to feel so alone anymore.
Thank you. Wow. Well, good evening, and thank you for the invitation, of course. So my name is Raphaëlle Thirion, and I am head of the refugee expertise at the Adecco group in France. And for a few weeks now, I have been in charge of developing this expertise in other countries of the group in Europe and Western countries. The Adecco group, our core business is about employment and vocational training, let's be clear, and perm work, temp work. And what made sense for us and what led us to engage more directly on the refugee issue, well, it differs from country to country, but basically in France it was the 2016 events, you know. If you remember, it was the time of the jungle camp of Calais, right? And all these inflows of refugees in Paris and in the Ile-de-France area. And at that point, my bosses were like, okay, we knew what happened, okay? And now we can't avoid facing it. We are the Adecco group. We are we are the first private employer in France. We must do something, we can do something. So what can we do? And from 2016, we developed first experimentations, because it was kind of new field. And then experimentations became projects, programs. And today, the Adecco group in France, for example, provides support, jobs, training to more than 3,000 refugees, people under the refugee status. And the narrative is important. I would like to discuss that later. But 3,000 people under the refugee status in France, and 200, 300 of them are part of tailor-made, dedicated programs for our client companies. And I will tell about that later on. But for example, in Poland, of course, the Ukrainian crisis was the trigger. In Italy, no need to present the Italian situation as when it comes to refugee questions. There's one thing I would just like to add, please. It's a matter of definition. I'm an operational, I work in the field, but related to question about asylum seeker and refugees, as we are the employer, we make people work, temp work, training under temp work status. We only can employ people under the refugee status. We can't work with asylum seekers. So when I talk about people under the refugee status, it means that in France they have the right to work in France because they received French protection. And that's important in our status, in what we are able to provide for them.
Thank you. Coming back to you, Raphaëlle, we would love to have your insights, like more concretely and precisely, how you do that, how you work with refugees, how you try to integrate them, and how you try to advise your clients to integrate and include refugees in their workforce and the organization economy in a bigger picture. Who are your partners and how you do that?
Well, we have many partners, and well, I'm part of the business unit of the Adecco group called Humendo. And Humendo is specialized in sourcing, recruiting, training, finding jobs for people far from employment, including refugees. And we have this refugees expertise in Humendo. We are not charity, we are not foundation, we are not NGOs, we are a business unit, okay? So for us, and that's what I find very interesting in this job, is that for us, we have to find job opportunities before talking about providing support to people under the refugee status, okay? Everything starts with our client companies. I will give an example. You are Volvo. I am allowed to talk about Volvo, so I'm talking about Volvo. You are Volvo and you need mechanics, okay, for your trucks. And we are discussing with Volvo and we're like, okay, mechanics is a fine job, and of course we can train people for you to, it is skills jobs for them, and to address your need in terms of qualification and investment in human resources. And we can do so with an untapped pool of candidates. These candidates, we can train them in French, we can teach them soft skills, Western soft skills, how to be an employee in France, because it is specific, it's something very specific. And then we can train them under vocational training, apprenticeship with your teams in the field. And then you can hire them, long-term hiring, long-term contract, or as we are the Adecco group, we can use long-term work, temp work, and so on and so on. But hiring, indefinite contract is the goal for everyone here. And Volvo says, wow, I'm interested, okay, how can we do that? And we built for them these training sessions. It's long process, okay, it's 13-month training, 3 months language, and then it's vocational training in apprenticeship. And during this whole program, my teams, they provide thorough social support. We were talking, you were talking, Marieke, earlier about what it takes to integrate people. I can tell you, it's breathtaking. It's a huge job. I mean, we deal with every single issues that can affect at one point or another the training of the job. Name it, okay? Administrative, residence permit, housing solutions, transportation blockages, health issues. I mean, we have refugees, people under the refugee status, who come to us. I mean, they still have bullets in their legs, okay? So, okay, how do we deal with that? Family reunion, everything that would make them stable, feel good. You can't get a job, get a training, keep a training, still being in training, if you don't have a solid roof above your head, okay? If you worry for your family abroad, if you have solid health issues, okay? So we deal with all that in order for our clients, at the end of the day, to have trained and qualified and stabilized people, collaborators. And this is important about the narrative, because they begin with that they are under refugee status and they are considered almost only as refugees, as you were saying. But our goal at the end of the mission is to change the narrative, including with the team in the field. They are not refugees. They are collaborators. They are temp workers. They are trainees. And that's very important. Sorry, I'm being long, but passionate as well, Marieke, sorry.
Thank you. Jessie, getting back to you, it's still a topic, as François said. There is a myth, there are many myths around the topic. And the perspective is also different. There are some people who are welcoming, and there are some people who believes in myths and the stereotypes, and they're not welcoming, and they have different perspective. Also in businesses, what are the challenges that you encountered as part of like your company working with refugees, are trying to promote justice and to support marginalized communities, specifically refugees?
Oh, where do I start? I think the biggest challenge we have is the narrative that is created by media and by governments at the moment. We keep joking at Ben&Jerry's that we're going to create an ice cream called Stick to Ice Cream, because anytime we talk about, even on our social media, like you can go on any of our European channels, Spain today, for example, we called out the government in Spain because it was found that they had illegally deported unaccompanied minors a couple of years ago, and a large number of them. So we called that out. And you just get all the comments, stick to ice cream, why are you focused on this, get back to ice cream, I'm not going to buy your ice cream anymore, blah, blah, blah. But we do have the supporters, but I think this is the biggest and most challenging and scariest thing facing us, not only here in the UK, where we have political leaders and their rhetoric, which at Ben&Jerry's we do not repeat or give any oxygen to the rhetoric, to the language, to these people or organisations. But that is the most dangerous at the moment. What was really encouraging though was over the weekend, I don't know if you saw how many people came out in the streets of Germany. We've been pulling our hair out. Our German activism manager has been beside himself for over a year now on the rise of the far right in Germany, the rhetoric there. 2 weeks ago when they had this meeting, what was discussed at that meeting, just couldn't believe it. And to see that public support and to see German citizens come out onto the streets of Berlin and say, not in our name, and we're not going to take that. So it's given us a bit of hope. We're seeing that in France at the moment with the protests against the immigration bill as well. So we remain hopeful. But I would say the biggest challenge that we have is the rhetoric. And are the politicians on the right who create this fear. You mentioned before the political opposition, that the government does, creates all the reasons why. The only reason, with all the analysis we've done, that political parties will be challenging accepting refugees and making you fear them, that they're going to come and take your jobs or your housing, as we saw in the Netherlands recently. Ask that government what they've been doing to solve those problems for their citizens. They are covering up the fact that they have not delivered. I mean, look at the government here. Since the current government came into power, what has happened to housing for the people of the UK? What has happened to the standard of living for people of the UK? But we'll distract you from all of that and the fact that we haven't delivered, and we'll other that problem and we'll put it on the most vulnerable. And that is again and again what we're seeing with populism and what we're seeing with governments around Europe. That is the biggest threat. I also wanted to pick up, in the Netherlands and working rights, we ran a campaign. Sorry, I'm just going to go off here. It varies by European country on rights to work. We are very proud of the fact that we were part of a campaign in the Netherlands, despite the political situation and results in November. Very quickly afterwards, a High Court revoked the 24-week limit on working rights for refugees and asylum seekers. So asylum seekers have the right to work in the Netherlands as well, but they were limited to 24 weeks in a year. We ran a campaign off the back of our entrepreneurship program where we tried to find work for one of our graduates, and we realised they couldn't work for more than 24 weeks of the year. So we, within the movement, created a campaign, joined a campaign, and we were successful within that campaign in having that 24-week limit revoked, and it was immediate. It was put into effect immediately. So now refugees and asylum seekers can work in the Netherlands. And I think this is what we need to see more of across Europe, across the world, obviously. But business has the ear of governments. And this is where we all need to, with businesses, it's great to go and talk to them about climate. It's great to go and talk to them about all the things that you're talking about. But let's also talk to them about workers' rights for refugees as well. And that's something we'd advocate.
Thank you. Raphaëlle, would you please also add on what are the challenges that Adecco Group or Homando faces working directly with your clients who are actually employers of refugees, and how do you make sure to advocate for inclusivity and diversity of their workforce?
Well, I love what you said, obviously. And I think that, well, I encourage our client companies that work with us to advocate, to show up, to say, okay, we did that, we are part of it, and you know what, it works. It works, okay, people, it does. And to have to change the narratives and helping changing the narrative, lobbying and being more political than what they are. So completely aligned, of course, with what you were saying. I will go on a field I am a bit more comfortable with, which is the operational field with our client companies. One of the big challenges we face is that the decision makers, when we sell a mission, basically, there are HR direction or diversity and inclusion directions, and they are like, okay, we love it, we are going to do it, and you have the big boss stamping and signing, and then it's like, okay, people on the field, please do. Okay, and that is such a key factor for failure. So one of the main challenges we are still facing, and we are working on it very hard, is how to onboard operationals, how to onboard the teams. We will tutor the apprentices, who will have them within their teams. And well, we tried several things. Some are efficient and some less. And there is one thing that works very well that I love to do. It's like, okay, people, you will have a 2-hour free expression time. Okay, so we will be there together, my operational team, the operational teams, and you will ask all the questions you have, all of them. And the less political, the better. And they ask all their questions. And we are answering step by step on every point from the law and from our operational support. And it works because even before they meet with their apprentice, there is something, there are biases that are less pregnant, there is biases that are less present in their mind. You know, I have questions like, cultural questions like, okay, if my apprentice is a Muslim, will he ask to do the prayer 5 times during the shift, and how do I deal with that? And we're like, okay, seriously, well, thousands of refugees never happened, okay? Never happened. But if it happens, this is how we deal with him or her and you. This is how we will help you. And we organize meeting time between apprentices and the teams in the field before the apprenticeship begins. We create links, we create trust. And this is a key factor for success. And believe me, I had catastrophic cohorts, catastrophic. And this always was the problem, always. So onboarding the operational teams is one challenge and a nice one.
Thank you. And my last question for both of you. You're doing amazing work as part of your organizations with your partners. And of course, it comes with challenges, as you said, maybe even more challenges. What is the added value, or what are the added value for your companies? What are the impact of integrating and including refugees in your companies? Why do you do it? Because it's a business and there should be a value. It's kind of an exchange. What do you receive in return?
Gosh, what don't we receive? I think for us, for Ben&Jerry's, we don't do things to make money. We do things to create progressive change. So I just want to make that clear. And I won't talk about the economic benefits. Maybe you can for your companies. What have I seen in the past 12 months? I don't know a single newcomer to a country who doesn't want to contribute, who doesn't want to work. And before I was at Ben&Jerry's, I was with IKEA and very close to the Skills for Employment program there as well, and the work that they did with refugees. And study after study will show you that anyone with refugee experience, anyone trying to get a start, they will be so loyal to you if you give them an opportunity. They're just so passionate to contribute, to have that sense of belonging. So this is something I think we need to get better at, as to the benefits of hiring people with refugee experience and what they give back to you and your company. I also think there's a missing link. We all talk in the corporate world about we need greater diversity, we need better ED&I, but we stumble when it comes to hiring refugees. They're no different. I mean, at a big global corporation, you're moving people internationally all the time. You're doing cultural training. When I moved to Sweden, I had to go and do cultural training. And when I tried to explain this to the HR team at IKEA when the Ukraine war broke out, and suddenly our CEO said, we need to hire as many refugees as we can, they kind of freaked out. And I'm like, But you do this every day. You hire people of different backgrounds, of different cultures. You move them across countries every day. This is no different. Okay, maybe the visas we need to look into a bit closer. But that, integration training. And I think where we're finding the challenges is a bigger problem we have in the corporate world, which is diversity and inclusion. And we are not good enough in our cultures, in our businesses, at recognising different cultural backgrounds and creating that inclusion, because it shouldn't be any different for someone with a refugee background as it should be from me from Australia, who is hands up an economic immigrant here to the UK and then to Sweden as well. It should not be seen as any different, and I think we need to get people out of that mindset. We looked at our next ice cream we're co-creating with refugees, and just to give you an example of more advantages, I don't know any other ice cream company that had a room full of people talking about tamarind, turmeric, cardamom in their ice creams, all these amazing flavours, because we had such diversity in that room, such rich experience. And when you bring anyone of a diverse background into anything that you're doing, and particularly creatives, and I think there's a big opportunity within creative agencies as well, and that entrepreneurial spirit of, well, why do you do it this way? Why can't I do that? And just that this kind of, my experience and all my friends and all our colleagues, they don't take anything that you tell them. They call out the BS straight away, and then they tell you how to fix it. And they're relentless. And I also think in the sustainability world and climate change, we need a lot more refugee entrepreneurs, because their can-do attitude and just their problem solving is incredible. So that's just a little bit of the benefits, and also my personal opinion on how we can maybe get over some of these hurdles.
Thank you. Well, benefits for the Adecco group. Well, we're selling missions, so I will talk about revenue, about market share, about differentiating and a differentiated offer. Quick word though, even though doesn't pay dividends, we have shareholder contract that protects us from paying dividends. So everything is invested in our project. And I would say what it brings most in the group is human values, and it is not just a way of saying, okay, I can see it in my teams, I can see it in my clients' teams, okay? It's hard work. It's very ungrateful and very hard work. But at the end of the day, we all have the feeling to do something that has meaning, that is bigger than ourselves, and figures speak the loudest. I mean, between 70% and in rural area, Marieke, we need to discuss that, 85% of the people under the refugee status that we have in our associate staff, they got hired long-term within the companies. They did their apprenticeship. And that, I mean, it brings meaning to our work. And it's important for my teams in the field. It's important for the client teams in the field, because they discover new people, diversity of opinion. I mean, we were with Suez the other day, and the director of one of their sites was like, okay, you understand that this guy, he helped us to improve our process because he thought what we did wasn't logical there. And they were so proud of it. And these things that bring value in a company, that bring proud, and the people that are tutors, at the end of the day, they feel valued, and their experience is valued within the company as well. So it brings a lot of things, really.
Thank you for your amazing and meaningful work. I think we have time to receive some questions from our audience. Yes.
Thank you all for everything. That was really fascinating. I have a question. I guess it will be easier maybe for Adecco to answer, given the spectrum of your clients. What about the whole supply chain? Do you have clients who also think about refugees and or countries at war, where they operate, and think, okay, maybe we need to go a bit beyond?
I can actually take this one. I can take this. Yeah. So I spent a long time working at the Body Shop, so I have a lot of friends who work in that kind of supply chain area, and it's something that we call it our values-led sourcing. And yeah, a lot of people are looking at that. One, who wants to leave home? You want to be able to have a great career, earn your money, stay with your family, stay at home. And so I think in that kind of sourcing development world, they are trying to look at those solutions. And it is hard because I think we had the stats on the agriculture that is very climate dependent. But I have also heard from specialists in that field that they go out to do audits on cocoa fields in Côte d'Ivoire, for example, and the farmers are saying, I'm not doing coffee anymore. Why should I do your coffee? I couldn't feed my community during COVID. And also my kids don't want to take over the farm. I've educated them, they're going off to be lawyers and doctors. So I'm going to focus on what I can sell locally rather than selling this to you guys because that's not as dependable for me. So things are changing quite rapidly. But I think that is something that within the supply chain, and I think that's also a responsibility of big global organisations as well. Can you be creating those opportunities to strengthen local communities? And I think also when we talk about climate change, the investment that Western governments could be making into these climate impacted areas to create those industries, that would solve a lot of problems as well. So it is, yeah, I hope that kind of answered your question, and it is definitely being considered. And then when you look at internally displaced communities as well, and creating those jobs and opportunities as well. And I love the framing of, let's not call people refugees, let's talk about displacement, because I think that's really important, and especially when it comes to climate change as well. We should be thinking about displacement and how we fix that, and I think supply chains are a good opportunity for that.
And if I may add, the creation of job opportunities in rural regions affected by climate impacts is a key tool for adaptation, so that people don't have to be displaced but can find job opportunities in a non-agricultural sector in a rural areas. And very often, especially in the global south, rural areas, the only jobs in rural areas are agricultural jobs, and developing industries that are not related to agriculture in these regions is a crucial element for adaptation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
One word that you kept on repeating is about the narrative. I think we, as you said, most of us here are probably migrants. Okay, we've got a great narrative. We are an elite. We are very lucky. We maximized it. Happy bunnies. Have you got examples of places where we managed to actually change this narrative from this negative one that is coming from those populists into a more positive one? And it drives me nuts, and I effectively feel completely powerless. I'm delighted with what you do, my hat off, but the reality is a drop in the ocean when you're talking about 3,000 roughly individuals. And I realize the amount of investment it does represent. Dealing with Syrian refugees here in the UK is mental, because you need all the stakeholders aligned. So, shortening the question or asking the question, what have you seen to good examples to prove that we can change this narrative? Where and how can we do that?
This is the million-dollar question, and especially as we're in a year that is so important for elections. Yep. I think this comes back to that age-old problem of media and the control that media has, because poll after poll, particularly here in the UK, shows that actually Brits are really supportive, and people in the UK, whether you've got citizenship or not, are really supportive of refugees and migration, and I think we would find this in many, many countries. We've been having a lot of discussions, we are connected to a lot of groups. The right are so well organised, they've got it down. I would say keep an eye out, and I'm really fingers crossed for this election year in the US and here in Europe, that you will start to see those narratives. We're talking to a number of organisations who are really focused on, and there's some really amazing individuals who are really driving this around what is that narrative. And some of the conversations I've been part of are do we even talk about refugees? Do we even use that word? Do we even use migration? Do we focus on shared values, the future that we want to see? And I think we all took great inspiration from the Polish elections last year, because that was people were like saying that was never going to happen. But how they did the communication and how they appealed to voters on shared values, built the future that you want to see. You have the power, you can be part of the change. Let's not let them win. So I'm really hoping we'll see that kind of narrative come out with the elections. But we do need to get a hell of a lot more organised, because the right, they have a playbook. It's copy and paste. I see it on our social media channels. It's the same stuff every country. Like, they just go around and do the same thing.
And they replicate what they did in the cigarette industry and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly. So we need our progressive playbook. And there are messaging guides out there as well.
Go ahead, Marieke.
Can I? Yeah.
Of course.
So I think, well, Bénédicte and I have been working actually quite a bit on a narrative, right, around ecological transition, which to many of us sounds like a pain, because we will have less, we will have to fly less around the world. We will probably have to eat less meat. There's a lot of, it seems quite constraining for the, let's say, for many of us. Actually, whether you are in the top or 10, whether you belong to the 10% richest in your country or the 10% poorest, actually ecological transition means
These
constraint.
people are probably part of the first group.
But I want to just emphasize that actually the ecological transition is also painful for those people, because it means that, you know, they have people who are in the lowest income decile. They have a diesel car. They need to, you know, there's a lot of, they have typically live far from their work. There's a lot of, you know, the ecological transition is painful for different reasons for many people. That's what I want to say. So we need a vision for how this ecological transition could be more positive. And so one angle, and I don't know if you notice on my slides, I often added bridging social capital in green. One angle, and it's a test, maybe you think it doesn't work, but one angle would be to say, well, actually, one of the, and maybe after the COVID, one of the things we've realized is that social capital, social ties is really important. Okay, so, what if in the future, so if this, everything will look a little bit, we'll consume less, we'll produce less, well, we'll have to do something. What if we will have more time to spend with people? What if we would be working 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week? What if we would have more time to take care of our parents who will become elderly, who will need our care? So what if we could create a narrative? And so it's not exactly the answer, but I'm going to just, what if we could create a narrative which is more around ecological transition, yes, but it would require, it would allow us to actually create stronger social capitals, more ties between each other, something more positive. So that's where I think maybe there's a narrative that we can create around making more space for bridging social capital, linked to a future which will require us to pull back on some things. It's a test. But maybe I want to test you guys whether you've heard of this term, welcoming communities, right? I came across this looking at studies from some urban planners who actually, it's another word, it's a pure narrative. They say, stop talking about host communities as if this is our turf, as if we have more rights to this place than people who arrive. Let's talk about welcoming communities. And there's this movement, and it seems like this movement has some traction, at least in the US, around just a change of word. But yeah.
The quick point that I wanted to make on the narrative is that when you look at the polls, and that really adds up to what you just said, when you look at the polls, people are worried about migration. That doesn't mean that they're racist or xenophobic, and actually most people are not racist or xenophobic, and in general are rather supportive of migrants. But they're worried about what they identify as a phenomenon that is out of control and that is unmanaged. And I think that the problem we have in the narrative is that we always speak of migrants, refugees, or asylum seekers in the plural, as if we were talking about a kind of group that would represent a threat. Whereas actually when you put things at the individual level, all people know a migrant. That guy thinking of new flavor for ice cream at Ben&Jerry's, that guy with a bullet in his leg, whatever, and they can relate to people who are also refugees or migrants as asylum seekers, but who are basically like them, who are football fans, pretty bad cooks, divorced, whatever, and they can find some kind of common characteristics between them. And I think that the real challenge is to shift the narrative from the plural level, where migration or asylum appears as a problem, towards the individual level, where people can actually relate to someone who's been in a situation of migration, but that someone is also many, many other things. And clearly, being a migrant, refugee, or asylum seekers is not, I would say, does not define his or her identity, because his or her identity is also many, many other things. And I think that is the challenge today.
I would just like to conclude and give you two examples, one national and one local. Marieke, again, your slide earlier on. National, on the last slide that you showed, there were the tent logo, which is a community of big companies in the world committing for refugees integration through employment, okay? And go on the website, check the companies. It's a huge, huge movement, and they are committed to make things change. Yes, 3,000, I know, it's not much. For the people, it is much, but for France, it's not much. The Adecco group committed, for example, to support 85,000 people under refugee status till 2027. That's a big one, and this is one among hundreds of commitments by this company. So that is for the big message, so to speak. And let me tell you a story about the micro example, because don't underestimate the number of people in the field that make things change. We had this client, rural area, a small company. They needed to develop, of course, and they couldn't find anyone to recruit. They tried different things, and locally it didn't work, okay? And we arrived and we were like, okay, hello, we have this untapped pool of candidates, blah, blah, blah. And well, the man, the owner of the company was like, no foreigners, no, sorry. And his wife was like, you know what, we don't have any choice right now, so let's give it a try, you know. And they hired one, and then two, and in confidence, months later, his wife told us that, well, he renounced his membership, his hard membership, he had it for years, to the hard right-wing political party in France. Don't underestimate what's going on in the field. And Adecco is really one of many, many actors in the field, making things change bit by bit. So here are your two levels, and hope for the evening.
I'd like to come back to the micro one, actually. And I'm very glad, actually, you bring this story, because I'm thinking of all the SME or large private businesses. They don't have 30 months in front of them, and they really need to hire those people. Those companies know for a fact that diversity is great. Having said that, they want to minimize the risk as much as possible.
Of course.
And they see it as a risk, basically. So what's your advice for those kind of companies to hire those refugees and basically solving the issue from a bottom-up perspective?
Working with very, very local experts. My advice is you can try and do it by yourself, but sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing as well, because it was mentioned during the introduction. I think I've seen that it takes roughly 10 years for a refugee to reach the same level of expertise he had from his original country. So sometimes they are higher at another level, and create a bit of entropy. I mean, the synergy within the team is, it's difficult.
So for the SME question, everything is local with the SME. So if you want it to be a success, you need to work with local partners who who will work in proximity with you, who will address your needs and questions and can intervene with you in case of difficulties. There will be difficulties, so you need to be with solid partners. That is the key, really. And as for the second part of your questions, I'm sorry, which was...
So are you at the right level?
Yes, I'm so sorry. We've met with refugees who were qualified, and we work with French universities and big name, big schools, Pont-et-Chaussée, for example, for French people in the south, and we are trying to make them begin at a higher level, but this is still an ongoing fight, really. But most of the people under refugee status, we are training for blue-collar, and I hate the expression, but blue-collar jobs were not qualified or they had very few qualifications, or, and this is interesting, they didn't have theoretical qualifications, they didn't have diplomas, but they had experiences. And this we value. This is so very interesting because, well, in France, diploma is everything, diploma certification. So what we do is we train them to our norms and our standards, okay? But they bring so much on the practical side that very quickly in the companies, they see it and they make them evolve. And that doesn't answer, but it echoes what you said earlier about several step processes. You begin at one point, you make it work, and then what? And again, in rural area, another client, and this one, he took 11, I think, refugees, SME as well, agricultural sector. He hired them, but he was like, okay, you're very sweet and very nice, and now I have my 11 Eritreans, and I don't speak Eritreans. How do I do to make them evolve now? They manage the basics. They are good at their work. I'm very happy with them. How do I make them evolve? And first and foremost, from the language point of view, from the technical vocabulary point of view. And this is a so very interesting question I will address in the near future. Does it answer your question?
Two more questions, yeah.
Cool.
My question is around policy of about family. So basically, last year, the UNICEF published a report saying that about 43 million children had been displaced internally due to weather-related events. How companies, this is a more international question, but how companies can reflect on protecting the children of employees who move internally because of climate change? Because that same report reflect on that climate change, or like moving because of weather-related. Those children that the study had been working with, the movement and climate change increased massively the risks of exploitation, of forced labor, of many risks. Many companies care about children so that they give maternity leave, they give different processes and policies. How can those policies and childcare processes develop with the different needs that this issue bring forward?
Can I answer that
yes,
first?
Go for it. Yeah.
Thank you. I will begin by the operational side, and I will let you on the political side. For example, when we have a collaborator under refugee status asking for his family to join him, we do the job. We help him with the administration to ask for a family reunion. And when the family is here, we deal with housing issues. And this is not small feat because really we already did the job for him, finding him housing solutions. But it's generally, Parisian area or in France, it's generally small. Your first house, your first studio, or apartment is generally small, it means that if we bring the family in, we have to redo entirely the job and to find a bigger apartment. Okay, you can't live 4 people in 20 square meters, for example. So this is how we engage with the family matter and with the children matter as well, to allow our employee under refugee status to bring their family in with them and for them to be protected as well. Please.
Yeah, we don't deal with internally displaced, because in Europe, I understand the countries that you're talking about, but what we have seen across European countries is a continuing threat or move from governments on policies around family reunification. I don't know if anyone knows, but the UK and Switzerland are the only 2 countries in the EU that don't permit family reunification. So if you're an unaccompanied minor and you were granted refugee status in the UK, you cannot bring any family members over. So you stay unaccompanied. And we know the shocking stats about unaccompanied children that go missing in the UK. So I think there is a policy situation here. We've been running campaigns on how unaccompanied children or even minors are put into detention in France. I don't know all the French people in the audience, if you, on top of what your government's been doing on the borders, particularly around Italy, detention centres for young people. So we are seeing increasing threats to young people, to unaccompanied minors. Even the question of how you prove that you're underage, I mean, how you go about that and what's expected of you is shocking. So I think as business or any organisations, we should be pushing back on that. We should be demanding more from our governments. Valentine's Day here in the UK, there's going to be a lot of refugee organisations focused on this and family reunification, so you can support their campaigns. But then from the work that I did at the Body Shop around when you are in vulnerable areas, where there is a lot of exploitation of children, I think when you have programs, so within the kind of CSR world, or when you're auditing the welfare of your workers, it's also looking at the community as well. It's looking at the children within the community. Are they going to school? What can you do to be granting greater protection in the communities from those threats? But I think you've hit on a very, very good point, that displacement then means that children are travelling unaccompanied. They're taking greater and greater risks. In Latin America, it's absolutely huge. So yeah, but I think policy we really need to be really sharp on, and particularly here in Europe, and how young people are treated as well. So it doesn't quite answer your question, but I think there's a lot. If you've got operations in vulnerable communities that you can be doing to focus on not only the worker but the families and the communities around that, to make sure that children are not vulnerable, and you're running programs that, for example, have children in school. One thing I learned through the work we did at the Body Shop was keeping children, and particularly girls, in school through to high school was really difficult. So we ran programs where we started building high schools, and we were working within the local communities to show them the benefits of young people going through to high school as well. So yeah, sorry, just a few ideas, but it definitely needs attention.
So I think we are running out of time, and so we're gonna wrap up, but we'll have a networking cocktail afterwards, and all our panelists will be there, so you can ask them follow-up questions as well.
So I don't know for you, but I'm impressed by the quality of, I found you all amazing. I'm not objective, but I really found you all amazing. Yeah. So yes, conflict of interest. So thank you so much, to you 5, Marieke, François, Behishta, Jessie, and Raphaëlle. A big applause to them. Yeah. And thank you again to the UK team for, allowing us to organize this nice event. I wanted to say just a few words before, going to the cocktail, and this topic is very important. As Michael said, it's also related to another important topic for us, which is about social ties. This relates with the narrative that you said. And we really want to push research and education on that topics. So we have, ambitious projects like creating a chair on this question of refugees, or something. I don't know if it's a chair on social ties, but something like an observatory on these questions as well, involving researchers, doing science-based research and also applied research, involving our students, creating new courses on all that topics. So we'd like to also to mobilize the HEC community on this question. So if you are interested to join our collective efforts and collaborate with us, don't hesitate. Just join us and connect with us at the cocktail, and after it will be our pleasure. So thank you very much again, and it's time for the cocktail. Yes.